Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 20 of season 3 of Babylon 5, and the rock cried out, "No hiding place." No, not that rock, a generic rock, young people. Z-14 days. Ivanova monologues as telepaths are sent out to those prepared to fight the shadows. Sheridan hardly leaves the war room, Franklin remains on walkabout, and Brother Theo remains a calming presence. Jakar is determined to have Narn's bodyguard the telepaths despite their protection already being guaranteed by the host races, whilst Londo has decided to remove him from the picture by getting him back to Narn, and Veer is going to help, apparently. Ivanova greets a group of religious leaders from Earth with Brother Theo, although he's not too keen on the evangelical minister, despite them clearly being old friends, and is happy when Ivanova announces she has temporary quarters for them. Lord Reefer appears in the background in the docking bay as they leave. Delenn has been dispatched to seek out a cranky Sheridan. It seems the shadows are attacking randomly, yet the attacks themselves are wholly logical, so Sheridan is trying to figure out what they're missing. Delenn boxes him in by saying she's promised they will have dinner with the new arrivals, and so if he doesn't turn up she'll be dishonoured. He complains that she doesn't fight fair and calls her a pain in the backside, to which she calls him a grouch on the way out the door. Veer tells Londo about Reefer, who says he knows he's arrived, and goes on to explain to Veer that he's located Natoth in a cell below the Kari's government building. Only Jakar knows the layout, and Londo is confident their close relationship will result in his heading back to Narn to rescue her. Veer of course says Jakar won't believe him, but Londo reminds him that he has helped Narn escape before now while he was on Minbar, so he will be trusted. When Veer plain refuses, Londo's expression hardens, and he goes on to threaten Veer's family with utter disgrace and ultimately destruction, having exposed Veer's actions on Minbar. Reefer is trying to kiss up to the Emperor's right-hand man, who has come with him, who notes that they haven't recognised Babylon 5's independence, saying there isn't much there to be independent about. It becomes apparent that Londo's ascension now puts his house in direct competition with Reefer's, and the official wants an end to the hostility between them. He has yet to determine which side he will put his word in for. Londo and Reefer exchange looks as they pass in the doorway. Veer hesitantly approaches Jakar's quarters and explains he has news of Natoth, and Jakar grudgingly takes him inside. Shortly after, Londo listens to the minister outline the same thing he told Reefer. When Veer joins them and confirms he's spoken to Jakar, Londo says that he plans to let action speak for him, to put an end to the rivalry between the houses by putting House Malaria ahead. He takes his leave and Veer is feeling used as a result. As they part, one of the guards outside the room leaves his post. Sheridan, Delenn and Ivanova are meeting with the religious leaders, who it turns out have taken side jobs as intelligence agents and brought data crystals with various reports on them outlining the situation back home, where there is far more resistance than President Clark might like to admit. Without ISM, this is a valuable resource for the station, which is being painted as a pirate's port back home. Jakar comes to Garibaldi to ask a favour. He needs something smuggling onto Narn, about his height, his width. In fact, him. The risks are obvious and many, but Garibaldi agrees to try. Meanwhile, Veer gets into a lift with Reefer's security guard, who initiates a signal, and as the doors open, 4 men bundle Veer back into the lift as the guard claps a hand over his mouth. He is then thrown into a darkened room with Reefer, who calmly states that he wants to know what Londo is planning, or Veer will not leave alive. Brother Theo's favourite minister wants to hold an open service that will be a little more lively than Theo would prefer, and Sheridan agrees. They can use the chapel. Reefer inevitably tries to bribe Veer to encourage him to betray Londo, but as scared as he is, he won't say anything. Unfortunately, Reefer isn't alone, and a scary, almost Mentats-looking Centauri telepath takes Londo's early conversation about Natoth from his mind. In black and white. They take their leave, with Veer confined to the room. Brother Theo's friend wanders into Sheridan's office as he can't sleep, with Sheridan still working. He asks Sheridan who he shares, not his work with, but the responsibility he shoulders. He said that during the Minbari War he watched as the closed-off officers became consumed by their responsibility, whilst those who sought to share their burdens did better. Sheridan says he doesn't have anyone to talk to, but the minister notes that Delenn clearly loves him. Sheridan starts to get decidedly cranky at that point, and shuts him down, and the minister understands he's overstepped the mark, but makes one final point. His future wife used to come and help him clean his apartment from time to time, even when hers was messy, and she said that helping him clean his let her forget the state hers was in, and when she was sweeping her floor, all she was doing was sweeping hers, and he appreciated the company. Sheridan sees the point. For the first time we see the Narn homeworld, or what's left of it after the Centauri bombardment almost a year ago. The air is thick with dust, and a nuclear winter is in effect after the mass driver bombardment. G'Kar has arrived safely and is gathering support to go after Natoth. Reefer has also arrived to a facsimile of the royal palace on Narn prepared for a visit by the Emperor, seeking 7 guards from the caretaker Centauri so that he can intercept G'Kar and take him back to Centauri Prime in chains as a prize for Emperor Katagia, along with Mallory's head on a platter, ideally. In the war room, Sheridan has sought Delen's counsel, because it's nice to have the company. But when they both look at the pattern of the shadow attacks together, they come to realise that they have not been methodical. They have moved from one area to one far removed rather than progressing in a straight line. As they peel back the attacks over time in 3 dimensions, they see that a central area has been left untouched, and this is where refugee ships and escorts have been gathering, because it is quiet there. They realise that this is the intent. A strike on such a fleet would be very demoralising, and Sheridan realises this approach is about terror rather than territory. It's what he would do if he was thought like them, at which point Delen literally drags him out of the war room, because you will not have him thinking like the Shadows. Londo rescues Veer from his captor. On Narn, G'Kar leads his team into the catacombs, but they are confronted not long after by Reefer and his escorts, who happily announces G'Kar has just taken his last steps as a free Narn. On the station, the service is underway, with the message being that we are all aliens to one another, but that does not make us enemies. Reefer's celebratory mindset is rapidly quashed when the guards do not respond to his command to take G'Kar into custody. G'Kar responds that they are waiting for something, and holds up a holographic projector. Londo appears in a recording, explaining that in a few minutes Reefer will be dead. He has taken from Londo that which he loved, so far as Londo knows, and got in his way in the royal court, weakened homeworld with constant warfare. He has provided G'Kar with evidence that Reefer was instrumental in the bombing of Narn against his advice, along with other atrocities. On the off chance G'Kar doesn't buy that, and Reefer says he's lying, he is also releasing 2,000 Narn, half in advance, half after G'Kar's cooperation. And with that, the message ends. The Centauri guards leave. G'Kar plants a data crystal on Reefer and tells the others to keep his face and head intact for identification. Everything else is theirs. Reefer tries to run, of course, but is cut off as a gospel singer sings "No Hiding Place" back on the station. G'Kar does not take part in the beating that follows, but it's obvious Reefer and his impressive eyebrows will not be seen again. The bloody data crystal is presented to the Emperor's representative with incriminating evidence on it, suggesting Reefer was giving information to the Narn resistance to make the Emperor look weak, so he could advance his people into key positions. In taking Reefer out in this way, as his message told him, Londo can thusly discredit him and his family in a way that would not otherwise have been possible, cementing Mollari's position in the royal court. Veer is dismayed after they leave because he knows he's been used. Londo knew Reefer had a telepath, so Veer became the bait for the trap, albeit unwittingly. Veer is truly shocked that he could have been killed. Londo says he wasn't important enough to kill, and Veer fires back that he was important enough for Londo to lie to. Sheridan is on the White Star with Delen for a reason she isn't revealing, other than the cryptic clue about him needing to know what resources are available to him, now that they have an advantage for the first time that will allow them to mount a counter-offensive against the Shadows. And as they exit into real space, his jaw drops, as Delen explains that the White Star was never intended to be one of a kind. Before them stretches a fleet of ships, to be flown by the Rangers under their joint command. This is why they needed time to prepare, as the ships are only now complete. She says they now have, as he would say, a fighting chance, and they kiss passionately on the bridge of the White Star. Z-10 days. So, we have a countdown going on, but to what it isn't clear. This episode is a very nice example of JMS's ability to misdirect, and that incorporates some outcomes we might question as the viewer. Does Reefer forget what's coming to him? Well, yes. He's a nasty piece of work, but then Londo shares a lot of his attitudes about the Narn, which is why he knows he has to sweeten the deal with G'Kar. The really clever misdirection is, of course, that right up until that point in the catacombs, it does look like Reaver might get a drop on Jakar, just when we were hoping to see him rescue Natoff. Then the flip comes. Jakar's been in on it the whole time. The thing is, you could have had a double-triple cross here, because Londo could have bagged Jakar into the bargain, but it looks like Jakar had reserves in place, and would probably have known ways to evade pursuers in the catacombs. Still a massive risk just to save 2,000 and kill one Centauri. I think the scene everyone remembers here is Reaver trying to break away in slow motion and being blocked at every turn, with the bright cheery gospel music being sung in the background with flashes back to the station and the congregation there singing their hearts out. Jakar is also surprisingly brutal here, in the sense that he's quite happy to watch Reaver getting beaten into a pulp, but interestingly, he himself does not get physically involved. I wonder what the other Narn thought about that in terms of solidarity, although I suppose they will have appreciated he needed to get back off Narn again pretty rapidly, which is why you see him walking off. But, ultimately he has been used as a tool for Londo's political gain here, so it's an interesting scenario. Poor old Veer keeps his hands clean despite everything that goes on, but only because he's threatened and used by Londo to get Reaver to take the bait. Whilst it's sort of nice that Londo comes to rescue him personally, he's the one who set him up to be in that position. At the end of the day, as naive as Veer sometimes is, it's got to hurt being used as the expendable aid and being belittled into the bargain. Unpleasant. Nice to see Brother Theo being his typical sarky self again with his fellow religious leaders, and as JMS often does, he gives us a group of faiths rather than just another Christian, and they all travel together. Plus none of them try to ram religion at anyone, they're just there to help, and Sheridan needed the wake-up call that Delenn is totally there to share the burden with him, just as she did in Severed Dreams. After all, the Inquisitor was there to question them both, and their command has almost always been joint where the Rangers are concerned. And it takes that extra perspective to see the overall seemingly chaotic shadow strategy, herding largely defenceless ships into one spot where they can be annihilated en masse. Nasty. Yet we know from the start of the episode, leading on from efforts in Grey 17, that telepaths are now being quite widely deployed to try and slow down shadow ships, and finally this episode we get the reveal of Delenn's ace in the hole, an entire fleet of White Stars. Sheridan now has real options because we know a single White Star can take down a pinned shadow vessel or combine its firepower with others to do so. So as Delenn says, a fighting chance indeed. Whether this is an entirely appropriate moment for a big kiss, I'm not quite sure. I mean, what's she going to get him for next Christmas that will top this? Seriously though, it does mean that for once the momentum is with them. Although if I were to put my space dock type hat on, I'd say having that many presumably unmanned ships clustered together in one place is rather silly. But space is big, really big, so hard to find them I guess. So we're left with the clear impression that some sort of big battle is likely in the last couple of episodes this season, because otherwise a lot of refugees are likely to be killed, and we now know the firepower is probably available to prevent that outcome. Worth remembering here that no one has seen this level of CGI in a show at this point, which meant that Star Trek had never been able to do seriously large ship engagements. Severed Dreams set an incredibly high bar in and of itself of course, but we're getting into next level territory now. The thing is, you can throw CGI at stuff, but if you don't care about why it's happening, then it doesn't matter. We're clear here about what the stakes are, so it isn't CGI just for the sake of it. It's supported by a story-based need for it, so that's fine. It's also a bolt out of the blue, because we've had zero hints that Delenn had this up her sleeve, and it means that the Army of Light may now be able to stand on its own without needing Vorlon intervention. So this is a big deal for the younger races, and it gives the fans something to get giddy about for the end of the season, which is very rapidly approaching now. So on this bombshell, I shall leave you until next week.